You wake long before the cock has even bothered to clear his throat. The rafters over your head are a darker black than the room around them, a geometry of soot and cobweb that you have stared at on and off through winters and fevers and harvest nights. The straw beneath your shoulder blades pricks like nettles through the ticking. The hearth is a low red eye. The cottage smells of ash and wool and last night's pottage. Beside you, Ellen has rolled onto her side, one arm thrown over little Rafe, who sleeps like a bundle of laundry, all elbows and breath. Maud, your daughter, has migrated in the night and is curled at your feet, toes tucked under your calf for warmth. It is the same scene you have known since you could remember only this morning. It feels like a farewell. You lie still, counting your heartbeats until they even out. It would be easy to let the heaviness of the bedding draw you back under easy, to let the day begin with the clank of the pail and the bleat of the sheep and the familiar weight of the plough stilts in your hands. Easier than unlatching the door of your life and stepping into a dark you cannot see the end of. But a winter ago, when the cough took your sister and then spared you, you went out to the old ash at the edge of the north field and pressed your forehead to the furrowed bark and swore it. If your breath returned and your hands steadied, you would go to Rome and stand beneath the great basilica and give thanks for what had not been taken. You have lived a whole year under that promise, like a stone in your pocket, awkward, undeniable, sometimes irritating, never forgotten. You ease yourself up, careful not to wake the children, and coax the hearth to a brighter ember. The kettle is where Ellen left it, the handle wrapped in a rag so you will not blister your palm. When the water warms, you pour it over yesterday's oats, and the steam climbs into your face with a hayfield sweetness. The wooden spoon hits the bowl rim with a sound that is already a goodbye. Ellen's eyes open. She watches you from the pallet. There is no drama in them, only the flat blue of someone who has spent winter knitting shrouds. You mean to go today? She says, not asking. I do. Your voice surprises you with how steady it is. If I leave with the first light, I can be at the manor before they lock the gate. I'll ask the reeve for leave. And then, you don't finish the sentence because the rest of it is too big to hold in the mouth. And then roads. And then ships. And then a city you can picture only as a rumour of domes and candles. The centre of Christendom, like a coal at the heart of the world. Ellen sits up, wraps her shawl around her shoulders, crosses to the peg where your cloak hangs. She shakes it once, and little flecks of chaff fall like pale snow. You will write, she says, and then snorts softly at herself, as if letters could find us. As if letters came to Elmsworth. She lifts your cloak and drapes it over your shoulders, as she has done every morning of your marriage when frost stood in the ruts like glass. Then remember, instead, bring back what you see. Tell it to the children until they can say it with you. I gave your brother my word. You say, he will look to the sheep and help with the ploughing. Elfric is good with beasts, she says, less good with mending shoes. She nods at your boots in the corner, turned on their sides to dry, the hobnails showing like little teeth. You'll want rags for your heels and a spare length of thong. And the pennies? You glance at the hem of your under-tunic, where the stitches look clumsy compared to Ellen's neat hand. Inside, wrapped in a rag, lie 3 groats and a clipped penny and a small pilgrim token that a tinker passing through swore would keep your stomach from turning at sea. It is a ridiculous thing, a stamped tin scallop, but your palm likes the feel of it. And superstition is a kind of bread men chew when the cupboard is bare. Rafe wakes with a small groan and sits up, hair in his eyes. Father, I go to speak to Master Harlan. You tell him. I will ask leave to make a journey. A short one. How far? He rubs his eyes with his fists. Farther than the market town, you say, and his mouth makes a little O. For him, the market is the edge of the mapped world, where eels wriggle in baskets, and the leather seller's wife has a cat with one blue eye. You smooth his hair. You will be good for your mother. You will count the lambs. You will not chase the geese. He nods solemnly. Maud wakes too, pulls at your sleeve, says, Bring me a red ribbon, and you promise, because it costs nothing to promise and costs much to keep. Dawn comes like a slow spilling of milk. You shoulder the script. Ellen has patched and repatched for years, a small knife in its sheath, a horn cup, a lump of hard cheese, a heel of bread, a twist of salt, the little pewter spoon with a nick on its handle, a length of cord, a whetstone wrapped in cloth, a bit of wax for blisters. You take up the ashstaff your father cut before he grew stooped, and for a full minute you stand in the doorway, not because there is anything to see the lane, the hedge, the ash beyond the paddock, but because this rectangle of air is the last frame of the life you know. Ellen follows you to the threshold. She kisses your cheek. She smells of smoke and thyme and wool. Go early to the reeve, she says, practical even now. Before he has cause to be sour, say it is a vow. They cannot gainsay a vow without courting God's temper. I will say it. You answer. The wind lifts the corner of her kerchief and tangles it with a strand of hair. You tuck it back as if that small domestic act could stand in for all the care you are leaving her to carry alone. I will come back before harvest. You add. And she does not say that harvest is a long way off, and that men have said such things to wives since Noah built a boat. By the time you reach the manor gate, the frost has let go of the ruts, and the mud is beginning to wake underfoot. The palisade throws a long shadow across the yard. Pigs shoulder one another at a trough. A boy with a face like a fox jerks his chin at you to wait. When at last they admit you, Master Harlan is at a trestle with a slate and a tally. He looks up without warmth. He seldom bothers to display it anyway. Martin of Elmsworth, he says. You owe 3 days' boon work on the Lord's fallow, and the south hedge mending yet stands undone. I will make them good when I return, you say. Your hands want to hide themselves in your sleeves, but you lace them behind your back instead, as if they belonged to a man accustomed to asking things of men. I come to seek leave to go to Rome. I am bound by vow. He sniffs. Vows. Vows. Every rogue with an empty larder finds a vow to chase. But he is a churchman's cousin and knows how close the reeve's power skirts the altar rail. He taps his slate with a bit of chalk. How long? By St. John's Day, I will be at the fields again, you say, and a quirk of his mouth admits the audacity of such precision. There is a company from Hamgate bound south by Michaelmas. I would go with them as far as the coast. He studies you for a long moment. You do not look away. At last he shrugs. Go, then. But if you are not back to swing a flail at harvest, your strip goes to your wife's brother until Candlemas, and the rent is due. I will not have the Lord's rye laid waste for your piety. I understand. You bow your head, not too low. Outside, the morning has come up clear and thin. The sun, a coin you could almost pluck from the hedgerow. You stand a moment under the ash by the north field, palm against its cool, fissured skin. The winter vow rises in you again, not as a stone now, but as a small, bright animal, quick and insistent. You whisper the words you whispered then, and you feel, absurdly, the tree listening. Then you turn your back on it, and on the cottage, and on the low brown shoulder of the fell, and you begin to walk. One field length, then another. The lane kinks and dips. The first blackbird lifts, a scribble of music in the pale air. You do not know the names of the towns you will sleep in, or the saints whose bones you will pass, or which part of you will not come back. You know only that a road is not a single thing but a string of decisions, each one no longer than a footstep. You put your foot down, then the other, and the world, which has always been enormous, begins at last to show you how. The first light of morning still clings to the hedgerows when Martin reaches the edge of the manor's fields. Behind him, the thatch roofs of Elmsworth are shrinking to a patchwork of smoke and straw. The road ahead is hardly a road at all, just two deep ruts where cart wheels have chewed through seasons of mud and frost. Beyond that, the country folds into a haze of trees and mist. He has never gone farther than the market at Hamgate, half a day's walk. Yet even the unfamiliar bird-song feels like a summons. He stops beside the last milestone, really just a lump of limestone marked with an old cross, and leans on his staff to rest. In the stillness he hears the earth waking, the groan of trees, the cawing of crows, the slosh of water in a ditch. It is not silence that greets a traveller, he realizes, but a deeper kind of listening. From the bend in the lane behind comes the scrape of boots. Martin turns and sees Hugh, the thatcher's youngest, trudging toward him with a bundle tied to his back and the grin of someone trying not to be afraid. You said I might walk with you a bit, Hugh calls out. I said you might see me off to Hamgate. Martin answers, but the warmth in his chest betrays his words. Hugh's face is sunburned, his hair the colour of new straw, and his eyes bright with the foolish confidence of 20. Your mother will have your hide when she finds your bed empty. She knows, Hugh says, though the quickness of his voice makes it clear she doesn't. I told her I'd help Master Piers fetch timber. She'll think I'm gone for the day. He drops his bundle onto the grass and straightens, breathing hard. You won't mind the company, will you? Roads are dull without talk. Martin shakes his head. A little talk, then, but keep your pace easy. I'm not 20. The young man grins, and together they set off. The lane rises gently, skirting fields heavy with dew. Patches of wild garlic scent the air. Larks hover somewhere above, invisible but insistent. For the first mile, they walk in companionable quiet, each measuring his own stride. When Hugh finally speaks, his voice carries both awe and disbelief. You truly mean to go all the way to Rome? I mean to try. I heard a merchant once say it takes half a year on good roads. Longer if the seas turn foul. Martin shrugs. If I live through that long, I'll count it a fair bargain. They cross a small bridge where the stream runs quick and brown, its banks lined with alder roots like clutching fingers. The water smells of moss and iron. On the other side, a pair of oxen stand yoked beside a broken cart. A man kneels by one wheel, cursing softly. He looks up as the travellers approach. Morning to you, Martin calls. The carter wipes his brow. Morning? Not yet it ain't. Wheel pin sheared clean off. I'll be here till Sunday. Hugh bends to look. We could help. Martin considers, then sets down his pack. They work together to lift the axle while the carter fits a rough branch into place. Sweat runs down their necks despite the chill. When the cart finally creaks back onto its wheels, the carter grins, showing teeth black with age. St. Christopher, watch your road, he says. You bound for the fair? Farther than that, Martin replies. South. South, the carter repeats, as if testing the word for danger. Then keep the sun on your left till midday. Past the stone cross. Take the lower road better footing. Mind the dogs at the miller's ford. They don't fancy strangers. Martin nods his thanks, and they move on. Behind them the carter's whip cracks, and the oxen lumber forward, dragging the world a few inches further into motion. By late morning the road widens, flanked by hedges grown wild with hawthorn. Hamgate appears ahead, a scatter of cottages around a square and a small wooden church. Smoke rises straight from its chimneys. The air smells of peat and yeast. As they enter, a group of children pause their play to stare, bare feet splashing in the puddles. Travellers are not so common these days. The market is already awake, stalls of onions, bolts of coarse linen, baskets of salted fish. A toothless woman calls them to sample her cider. A smith hammers out horseshoes with the rhythm of a hymn. Hugh's eyes dart from one marvel to another. Look there, he whispers, pointing to a merchant's cart where trinkets gleam like captured sunlight pins. Beads. Small, pewter saints. Martin smiles at his wonder. He remembers being that young, when even a smooth stone from another valley felt like a treasure from heaven. They find the Reeves' cousin, a steward for the local lord, sitting outside the tavern with a jug of ale. Martin explains his vow, shows the letter of leave marked with the Reeves' seal. The steward eyes it, grunts approval, and stamps the parchment with a crude wax sign of his own. The road south is clear enough, he says. Pilgrims have been passing all week. Best to keep with others if you can. Bandits grow bold near the coast. Martin thanks him. Inside the tavern, they share a bowl of hot pottage and a heel of bread. The fire crackles, and the noise of talk swells like a tide. Men speak of taxes, of wars in France, of rumours that the Pope himself might soon die. For Martin, each voice sounds like wind in 1,000 directions, and he cannot tell which one is true. Yet the uncertainty does not frighten him as it once would have. The world, he is learning, is larger than any man's certainty. After they eat, Hugh insists on buying a strip of dried apple for the road. For luck, he says, handing Martin a piece. The sweetness shocks the tongue after the dull salt of pottage. They step outside again, blinking against the pale noon. Clouds drift high above like sails. The road forks at the edge of town, one path winding east toward the marshes, another south into rising land. Martin pauses. The weight of choice presses on him, heavier than the pack on his shoulders. Which way, then? Hugh asks. Martin takes a breath. South, toward the Pilgrim Road. If the Lord wills, it will lead us to Canterbury. And after that? More road. They walk until the village noise fades into wind and birds. The land rolls away in slow folds. Once, they pass a stone cross half buried in nettles, its arms worn smooth by rain. Someone has tied a strip of red cloth around it, bright against the grey. Martin touches it as they pass, murmuring a brief prayer. By mid-afternoon, the sun slips behind thin cloud. The fields turn to heather and rough grass. The smell of salt drifts faintly from far away. They rest on a low rise where the road dips toward a valley, eating what remains of the bread. Hugh lies back and looks at the sky. When you reach Rome, he says, will you stay there? No, Martin answers. A man cannot stay in the middle of the world. He has to bring a piece of it back home. Hugh nods, though his eyes are already closing. The wind hums softly through the grass. Martin studies the boy's sleeping face and feels the strange tenderness that travellers share the knowledge that every companion is temporary, borrowed from the road itself. He rises quietly, tightening the straps of his pack. The sun dips lower, turning the clouds to brass. In the distance, a bell rings from some unseen village, a single note folding through the hills. He looks south where the road narrows into a thread between hedgerows, and for a moment he can almost see it running all the way to the sea, beyond to the lands of saints and ruins, to the city of his vow. He touches the small pewter scallop at his neck. One step, then another, he murmurs. The words vanish into the wind, but the wind seems to nod in agreement. He starts walking again, and the road, patient and endless, accepts his weight. By the second morning, the world feels larger than it did the day before, wide, wet, and indifferent. The spring thaw has turned every hollow into a puddle, every cart track into a sucking pit of mud. Martin's boots, newly bound with rags by Ellen's careful hands, are already soaked through. The road no longer resembles the tidy brown ribbon he imagined while lying awake at home. It's a living thing breathing, shifting, clinging to him as if determined to pull him back toward the earth he left behind. Hugh trudges beside him, his hair plastered to his forehead. He has tied his cloak around his waist to keep it from dragging in the muck, which only makes him look more like a drowned cat. If this is the road to heaven, he mutters, then the devil built it. Martin laughs under his breath. He likely just maintains it. The joke comes easily, surprising him. The weariness has a strange effect. It strips away the hesitation between thought and speech, leaving only honesty. They follow the sound of running water until they reach a low ford. The stream is swollen. The wooden planks meant to bridge it already washed downstream. A woman stands on the far bank, skirts tucked high, coaxing a stubborn donkey that refuses to move. Her hair, the color of flax, has escaped its braid, and her face smudged with mud and exhaustion shows the calm irritation of someone long used to things going wrong. "Good day to you," Martin calls across the water. "Do you know if there's a drier crossing?" "Not unless you can fly," she answers in a voice steady as rain. "And if you can, take me with you." Hugh grins at the boldness of her tone. Martin eyes the water, then the donkey, which snorts defiantly. "If we help you across, will he bite us?" "Only if you insult him," she says. "His name's Abel. He takes offense easily." Hugh wades first, the water climbing to his knees. The current is sharp and cold enough to burn, but they manage to guide the animal through, coaxing it step by step until it scrambles onto the opposite bank with a sound halfway between triumph and disgust. The woman follows, clutching her pack against her chest. "Saints bless you," she says, shaking water from her cloak. "I'd have been here till nightfall otherwise." "Think nothing of it," Martin replies. "The road's kinder when shared." She studies him briefly, his threadbare clothes, the scallop badge stitched to his cloak, and nods. "Pilgrims, then, toward Canterbury, and beyond if God allows." Then we share the path. She straightens the strap on her shoulder. "Eleanor of York, weaver's widow. And this brute," she pats the donkey's flank, "is my livelihood. Carries thread and linen for market, and me when he's feeling generous." Hugh offers a polite bow that nearly lands him back in the mud. Hugh Tanner, son of no one important. Martin introduces himself simply, and with that, they fall into step together. The hours pass under a sky that can't decide between drizzle and sun. The land opens into slow hills patched with gorse and sheep. Eleanor talks as they walk, not out of vanity, but to keep the silence from turning heavy. She tells them about York's crowded streets, about how plague emptied half her workshop in a single month, about the year of the comet when people thought the world would end and instead only grew poorer. Martin listens more than he speaks. Her voice is steady, carrying the same rhythm as the road 1 foot, then another, the quiet perseverance of someone who no longer expects fairness from life but refuses to surrender to it. By noon they find a patch of high ground dry enough for rest. Eleanor unpacks a small loaf wrapped in cloth, dividing it into 3 equal pieces. "Bread travels lighter when shared," she says. Hugh, cheeks red with gratitude, hands her a strip of dried apple in return. As they eat, Martin studies the horizon. The sky to the south is pale and clean, and far off. Like a tooth jutting from the land, he can see the tip of a church spire. Canterbury, he guesses. "Not yet," Eleanor says. "That'll be Ashwell. 2 days to Canterbury, if our boots hold." 2 days. Hugh groans. "By then my boots will be ghosts." Eleanor smiles without looking at him. "Then you'll walk on holy feet." They laugh together, and for the first time Martin feels something like companionship rather than merely shared direction. The road has a strange alchemy. It takes strangers and melts them into fragments of the same story. By mid-afternoon the clouds return, dragging the rain behind them. They pull their cloaks tight and press on. Every village they pass seems half deserted, cottages hunched under sagging thatch, smoke thin and uncertain. At one hamlet, they stop to refill their flasks at a communal well. An old man watches from a doorway, his eyes wary. "You'll find no beds here," he warns. "Too many strangers about. Robbers," they say. "We ask for none," Martin answers. "Only water." The man hesitates, then nods toward a bucket. "Be quick." His fear sits on him like another garment, heavy and frayed. When they move on, Eleanor murmurs. They see every traveller as a ghost now. After the sickness, people forgot how to trust the living. Martin knows she's right. Even now, 2 years after the worst of the plague, villages still carry its silence. The dead had gone, but the fear had stayed behind to mind their houses. As dusk bleeds across the hills, they spot a faint curl of smoke rising from behind a copse of trees. The smell of wood and meat follows on the wind. A small alehouse stands there, crooked and warm-looking, light spilling through the cracks around its door. Inside, the air is thick with heat and the sweet rot of spilled ale. A handful of men sit at rough tables, their talk low and slow. The keeper, a woman with arms like oak roots, eyes the newcomers but says nothing until Martin places a penny on the counter. 3 bowls of pottage, if there's any left. "There's always some," she says, and ladles stew from a blackened pot. The flavour leek, barley, maybe a scrap of pork seems miraculous after the day's hunger. They eat in silence, letting the warmth creep back into their fingers. Hugh's head begins to nod before his bowl is empty. The innkeeper gestures toward the hearth. "Floor's yours if you don't mind company." They spread their cloaks near the embers. Around them, other travellers lie in loose heaps, 2 carters snoring, a friar whispering prayers, a merchant mumbling in his sleep. The roof creaks with the wind. Eleanor sits upright a while longer, mending a tear in her sleeve by firelight. Martin watches the needle flash and vanish, like a tiny star struggling against darkness. "Will you go all the way to Rome?" she asks quietly. "If my legs permit, and if they don't, then I'll crawl a little," he says, half smiling. She nods once, approving. "That's the way of it. You walk until the walking changes you." He doesn't answer, but the words lodge somewhere deep. Around them, the fire sighs. The rain taps its rhythm on the roof, and the world outside their circle of warmth could be endless or gone, no one would know the difference. Before sleep claims him, Martin looks toward the doorway where the wind sneaks through in thin threads. Tomorrow, he thinks, the road will still be there, waiting. Mud, hunger, cold, and all. The price of seeing the world is merely the willingness to pay it. He draws his cloak tight and closes his eyes, and in the red darkness behind his lids, the road unrolls again, wet, glimmering, endless, leading always forward, always south. They reach Canterbury on a day the sky has forgotten its colour. Everything is a pale wash stone, cloud, the faces of people, so that the cathedral's mass seems less like a building than a cliff the town has grown against. The streets narrow as they climb, pressed between timbered houses that lean toward each other like old gossips. Bells are sounding somewhere beyond the roofs, slow and patient, and the sound threads through the lanes like a rope drawing them in. Eleanor walks with her hand on Abel's lead, murmuring to him when the crowd jostles. Hugh stares at everything at once, the signboards painted with beasts and boots and tankards, the stalls of candles and little pewter saints, the ragged children spelling out the contents of travellers' packs with hungry eyes. Martin keeps his scallop badge tucked under his cloak as if it were a warm coin, though he knows such badges invite neither robbery nor rescue, only the assumption that he is one among many, which, in a town like this, is true. By the time they reach the close, the square before the great church, afternoon has turned soft around the edges. Stone carvers work at a side chapel, their mallets ticking like beetle feet. A woman sells wax votives, tiny arms and legs and hearts, to leave before a shrine in plea or thanks. A pardoner in a patched cloak waves a rolled parchment and proclaims full remission of earthly penalties for a price nobody poor can meet. Wind moves over the worn paving stones and brings with it a hush that does not belong to weather. Martin lifts his eyes to the cathedral's western front. The door is crowded with saints burned pale by time. Spires rake the sky. He feels suddenly as if he has stumbled into the ribs of some enormous stone animal, and that if it were to inhale, he and everything he has brought with him would vanish in one long breath. The idea is not frightening exactly. It is the feeling of standing at the lip of the sea and recognizing you are made of the same salt. Within, the light changes. The nave receives them like a forest, might columns rising like trunks. Hush, sifting down like dust. Candles score the dimness with little golds. Pilgrims kneel in a long scatter, their backs making a kind of low hill. Martin and Hugh and Eleanor move with the rest, a slow shoal sliding toward the shrine. Along one aisle, glass burns in reds and lapis blues, saints and kings held in squares of story. A boy in a short cassock picks wax drips from the stone and rolls them into little balls which he pockets fast, as if the light itself were a currency he could save. At the shrine of the martyred archbishop, a monk with a face like a kindly hawk reads the names of the sick from a list, each name its own long candle. Martin thinks first reflex of his sister and says her name inside himself. He has said it so seldom in the last year that it startles him with its clarity. He kneels, and the stone presses his kneecaps with a frankness he respects. He does not ask for much in words. Asking never came easy. He settles instead on gratitude that survived the winter with him, an odd little plant that grew in the ash of grief. He is grateful for Ellen's hands, for the children's breath against his shoulder in the night, for the stubborn fact that he can still walk. He is grateful for the vow itself, which has not left him a coward's bolt hole. He touches his forehead and chest and shoulders, and the gesture is, for once, not habit but speech. They leave coins in a box near the shrine more than Martin can spare, and sink back into the nave's cooler air with that peculiar lightness that follows giving away what you thought you needed. Hunger comes after, sharp and sensible. Outside, evening has put a bruised rim on the sky, and the town's smoke thickens towards supper. The alehouse, they find, sits in a narrow lane where the gutters trickle with grey water. Its signboard shows a red fox prancing with a goose in its mouth, which strikes Hugh as a promise and Martin as a warning. Inside, the room is deep and low-beamed, the ceiling stained brown by generations of winters. Firelight glances off pewter and wet wool. A smell of yeast and onion underwrites everything. They find space near the hearth where a circle of travellers already sits in the arithmetic of strangers, far enough apart not to crowd, near enough to catch the warmth of shared bodies. A woman with ruddy forearms slaps earthenware bowls on the boards and fills them from a pot. Pottage again, and fresh bread like a memory of summer. Martin's first spoonful blanks his mind with its heat and peppery sweetness. His second allows the room back in. A tall fellow in a faded green hood leans toward them, his beard forked like a ruffed rooster's tail. From the north, are you? His accent folds its words as if tucking them into a purse. From Elmsworth, Martin says. Near Hamgate. Ah. The man nods, as if this explains many things. I am Hal of Romney Marsh, carrying wool where it wants to go. He gestures to the circle. This is Brother Michel, a small friar with quick eyes lifts a hand, and John the mason, who speaks by tapping stone, a man with shoulders like a yoke grunts without malice, and Margot, midwife, who knows more of souls arriving than priests know of souls departing. Margot, a square woman with a laugh held ready in the corners of her mouth, inclines her head. Eleanor introduces herself, adding Abel with a proprietor's pride. Hugh declares he has walked 2 days without dying, which earns him more respect than he expected. Martin gives his name last, as if hiding behind it. The talk goes as firelight tends it. Hal has news of roads drowned and roads mended, of a bridge rebuilt with coins begged in 3 counties, of a lord's men who inspect travellers' packs for contraband salt. Brother Michel spins a neat tale about a relic in Sussex, St. Blaise's comb that cured a child's stubborn cough and a shepherd's stubborn sheep. John the mason speaks indeed by tapping, his thick finger on the table to mark rhythm, his words few and heavy. Stone remembers. He says once, even when men forget. Margot does not tell stories so much as toss in flints that turn other people's talk to sparks. If you meet a pardoner with clean boots, she says, hide your purse. Real saints live in mud. What sends you south? Hal asks finally, turning the bowl in his hands. Trade? War? Love? He makes a face as if he has said something impolite. A vow, Martin answers, surprising himself with how simply he can say it. A winter vow. Those are the stubborn kind, Margot says. Spring vows melt. Hugh leans forward. And you? Why do people leave home? He glances around the circle as if an agreed answer might be written on the tavern's beams. To prove something. Hal says, to other men. To learn something. Brother Michel counters. About God, if you're lucky. About yourself, if you're honest. To sell something, John adds, and there is no contempt in it. To forget something, Margot says quietly. The fire pops. Or someone. Eleanor's spoon pauses mid-air. Sometimes to carry forward what would otherwise sink. She does not look at anyone, and Abel shifts his hooves just outside the door, as if reminding her of the price of practicality. Brother Michel smiles into his cup. "When I was a boy," he says, "I thought pilgrims were holy. Then I became one and discovered we are mostly tired. But tired people say true things." He props his chin on his fist and squints at Martin. "Do you mean Rome to change you?" "I mean to keep my word," Martin says. "If change comes, it will have to walk at my pace." "Wise," Hal pronounces, though he uses the word the way some men say stubborn. "The sea is ugly this month. If you take ship at Sandwich, go with a crew that knows the channel. Better yet, go with Fear. She's a good sailor, never sleeps on watch." Laughter scoots along the benches like a mouse. Hugh asks for advice on blisters. Margot prescribes wool greased with goose fat. Eleanor barters a little linen for a handful of onions. John draws with a wet finger on the table a perfect arch, its weight carried by 2 small stones. "Hold here," he says, tapping the keystones, and the whole vault stands. "Let these crumble," he shrugs. Down comes heaven. Martin studies the sketch until it fades. He suspects the mason is not only talking about churches. When the bowls are emptied and the ale grown shy in the jug, the talk thins into the language of bodies settling. People curl at the base of the fire, the arrangement of strangers returning packs under heads, cloaks pulled high. Outside, the wind scrapes along the lane like a beggar's bowl. Martin lies awake a while, watching the rafters. In their blackness, he maps what he has heard: roads that fork, bridges mended, saints' combs and pardoners' boots, arches held by small stones. The shrine's hush still sits in him like a cup half full. He thinks of Ellen's face when she handed him his cloak, of Rafe's round O of surprise, of Maud's quiet demand for a red ribbon. He thinks of his sister's name and how it felt to say it where stone listens. The fire breathes. Someone snores in a 3-note pattern that makes Hugh twitch and roll. Eleanor, propped on an elbow, is darning a second sock with the patience of those who have outlasted calamity. When she feels Martin's gaze, she looks over and, in the dark, gives a small nod that says, "Yes, the road is longer than we knew. Yes, we will walk more of it tomorrow." He closes his eyes. In the kiln of sleep the day softens and hardens again, a new brick laid where the old wall ends. Bells will wake them. Morning will come paler than this one or brighter, according to no rule they can guess. There will be more mud, more small mercies. He is not sure whether the fire in his chest is faith or stubbornness, or merely the habit of breath disguised as courage. He does not need to know tonight. Around them, the alehouse settles with the creaks and sighs of a ship at anchor. Outside, the cathedral keeps its own long watch. Stone thinking, stone thoughts under the moon. Tomorrow, they will step out into the town's cool exhale, and the road, indifferent and generous by turns, will extend the next uncertain mile, as if unrolling itself specifically for their feet. They see London long before they arrive, not as walls and towers, but as a taste on the air. The road begins to smell of tanneries and smoke, of fish scaled at dawn and set out too long in the shy sun. Traffic thickens, carts with wobbling wheels. drovers whistling cattle through ditches, women with baskets of eggs that click softly as they walk, men shouldering barrels whose iron hoops shine like wet crows. A pair of friars tramp past, boots patched with other boots. Every face seems turned downstream, toward a rumour of water bright enough to be a promise. Keep close, Eleanor warns, tightening her hold on Abel's rein. Hugh nods, but his attention leaps from one marvel to another. Here's a peddler shaking ribbons like a handful of rain. There's a juggler making 3 knives argue in the air. Farther on, a boy in a wolfskin draws a crowd by pretending to be the devil who can't count. Then London properly appears, first the scattered houses, then the clustering roofs, then the climb of steeples and spires, and at last the dark back of the bridge over the river, crowded with more houses as if a street had gone out to fish and never come home. The gate bites the road. A woman in a hood sells sprigs of pennyroyal. A man with a bell shouts the price of fresh water as if selling jewels. The press of bodies tightens to a kind of tide. Martin has never been in a city before. He feels it in his bones the way a tree might feel the sea when it hears it for the first time. Words fly in all directions. English, yes, but not the way he knows it rolled. Braided, clipped, spiced. French like silk snagging on a thorn. A harsh northern burr. Something guttural that might be German. Laughter lands on his shoulders like flakes of ash. He tucks his scallop badge deeper into his cloak and touches the little pewter charm at his throat out of habit, not belief. They make for Cheapside, following the river's glint between buildings that lean toward one another like book pages. Shop signs creak on their hooks, a fat goose, a boot, a crown, a mermaid with a grin like a knife. The street itself is a living creature, mud, straw, refuse, hoof, suck, dogs, the sort of noise that becomes a weather inside your head. Hold your purse tight, Eleanor says to Hugh, and to Martin she says, if he loses his money, we feed him for pity, which is no way to train a lad. Hugh pats the little wallet at his belt as if to reassure it. They stop at a stall where a Flemish woman sells thread and dyed wool. Eleanor haggles in a mixture of words and hands, folding prices like seams until both parties smile. Martin drifts to the edge of the market, drawn by a rhythm of metal on metal. A cutler displays blades in velvet-lined trays, steel catching the cloud light in quick fish slips. Nearby, a drummer marks time for a puppet show in which a knight defeats a dragon mostly by outlasting it. When he turns back to his companions, Hugh is gone. For a moment, Martin thinks he has simply stepped behind someone taller. Then, the moment stretches thin and snaps. He feels the city suddenly as a mouth with many teeth. Hugh, he calls, too quietly to matter. Eleanor's head lifts like a hound's. She swings up on the barrow's rim and scans the human sea. By the bridge, she says. I saw his straw head moving. They shoulder through. The pressure of bodies is its own argument. Everyone is always in someone's way. At Fish Street, the smell climbs from the river like a living rope eel and rotten tar. And there, half hidden by a tangle of sailors, is Hugh, cheeks white, hands spread, his belt slack and light. Gone, he says when he sees them. The word shakes like a blown candle. My purse, someone bumped me, then it was just gone. Eleanor looks at him with more steadiness than pity. That is the city's first toll, she says. You've paid it. Learn the lesson. What you don't tie down belongs to the wind. Hugh's eyes water with anger at himself. Which is better than tears? Martin touches his shoulder. You'll walk it back, he says. One day's labour at a time. He says it not as comfort but as arithmetic. Then he raises his head and looks for work. Work finds men who look like they need it. Down by the river, where the wharves crowd the bank like teeth, a foreman with arms the size of barrels is swearing at a crew too small for the tide. You there. He barks at Martin. Can you carry without breaking? Martin nods. And you? The foreman says to Hugh. Can you learn in 1 minute and forget in none? Hugh nods harder than the truth warrants. Good. Then you. Woman, I have a donkey. Eleanor says crisply, and nods at Abel. He carries like a Christian and eats like a saint. We'll haul your sacks if you pay honest. The foreman grins despite himself. Done. So they go to work. For hours. The world becomes a simple math of weight and distance. Grain sacks up, grain sacks down. Barrels rolled to a counting house and chalked. Band-ailed ropes. Tar under the nails. The river speaks in tongue they don't know but whose meaning is obvious enough. Hurry. Don't slip. The tide is God and will not wait. Martin feels the old strength wake in him, the strength that has trained itself on ploughs and hedges. His back complains, then falls silent. His hands learn the new weight the way hands always do. Hugh moves, as if trying to surprise the work into liking him. Eleanor manages Abel and the foreman with equal lack of fuss. Men shout, swear, sing bits of songs. A boy runs with a tray of pies that smell like meat and might not be entirely lying. At some point, Martin realizes he is not thinking of how far from home he is. He is only carrying. By dusk, the sky has opened again into colour. The foreman slaps a handful of coins into Martin's palm, fewer than the labour deserves and more than he expected. Honest pay, the man says, and the lie is so small and well meant that Martin lets it pass. He divides the coins without drama, one for Hugh, one for Eleanor, one for the donkey as oats, the rest for the night's roof. Eleanor chooses the lodging. She has a nose for places that won't rob you in your sleep and a tolerance for fleas that won't. They end up in St. Magnus Parish, under the bridge's shadow, in a room up a twisted stair where the window looks like an eyelid. The keeper, a woman with hair the colour of iron filings, counts coin with her lips and shows them the pallet, 3 men to a straw mattress, 2 women to the other, strangers as inevitable as splinters. Hugh stands at the window, shame on him like a second cloak. Martin sets a bowl of pottage in his hands. Eat, he says. Tomorrow we find the pilgrim road again. Hugh nods. I'm sorry. You're young. Martin says. The city knows how to teach the young. It has practiced 1,000 years. Eleanor, who has washed her hands in a wooden bowl till the water turned tea-brown, looks up. Tomorrow I trade at the cloth fair. After that, I go as far as Southwark. There's a woman there who sells raw flax deer and stories cheaper. If you aim to take ship, this week's winds favour sandwich. Sandwich, Martin repeats, tasting the thought. The cathedral at Canterbury had been a mountain. London is an ocean. He feels small on its surface, but also, oddly, buoyant. We'll go south with the morning. The road will be easier than this city. Eleanor snorts. Roads are honest. Cities are clever. That's the difference. They sleep hard, the way animals sleep when they have earned it. Sometime in the night, rain flings itself against the shutters and is dismissed. Sometime after that, someone across the alley plays a pipe badly until a shoe thrown from another window persuades him to stop. The beds itch, and the straw has opinions, but exhaustion is a mighty singer, and it lulls them. At grey light, Martin wakes to a city already running barrels rolling, bells talking to the river, gulls painting the air with their sharp-throated greed. He ties his boots, counts the coins, presses the pewter scallop at his throat. Hugh stirs and sits, hair in briars. Eleanor feeds Abel from a nosebag and whispers a litany of insults he seems to find encouraging. They step into the street, and London exhales them the way it inhales everything else. The bridge is a black idea above them. The river pulls east like a thought that can't be dropped. Somewhere a bell rings not for God but for commerce. Somewhere a washerwoman slaps a sheet. Somewhere a thief invents a new way to be human. They pass the churchyard at St. Paul's where sellers lay out used books, fat sermons, thin romances, letters, words changing hands with the same briskness as onions. At the southern gate, a man on a prancing bay horse nearly rides them into the wall. His cloak is green, the exact colour of money that doesn't apologise. He glances at them as if they are interesting mud. Martin half bows without meaning to. The man is gone before the gesture is finished. Remember him, Eleanor says. He will never remember you. That is also part of the city. Martin nods. The gate lets them out like a tooth, releases a thread. Southwark waits with its inns and its theatres not yet built, its pilots and priests and players of lesser sorts. Beyond that, the road to the coast unwinds, cleaner in the mouth than any street. They stand a moment, all three, in the doorway of London, as if listening to a great beast breathing. Then they turn their backs to it and begin again the simple religion of walking. The city remains behind them, hard, clever, glittering, full of tongues. Ahead, the fields return, and, with them, the oldest language. Martin knows mud. Sky, distance, time. He swallows, tastes smoke, and smiles. The vow is still ahead. His feet are still his feet. The road, which has nothing to prove, waits. The road to the coast teaches a different grammar of distance. Fields give way to salt marsh. Hedges lower their voices, and the wind learns to speak in one long sentence. By the second day out of London, the air tastes of iron and brine, and gulls sketch rude letters over their heads. The land itself seems to lean toward the sea, like a man craning to catch a rumour. Sandwich is less a town than a readiness. Quays, sheds, ropes, barrels, Men whose faces have been carved by weather into the sort of map only sailors can read. The tide runs like a thought that refuses to slow down. Boats nose at the wharf, impatient as hounds. The three of them stand in the swarming noise and, for a moment, do not know how to belong to it. Find the oldest ship with the laziest crew, Eleanor says, shading her eyes. Old boats know how not to die. Lazy men don't like extra trouble, which includes drowning. She speaks with the authority of someone who has bargained with 100 strangers and lost only the proper number of times. They choose a broad-bellied cog called the Mary Ann, her paint worn to honest wood, her stern boards patched handsomely. The master, a red-faced man with a scar like a sketch of lightning along his jaw, looks them over without curiosity. Passage to Calais, if the wind holds, he says. 6pence each. A penny more, if you want to be sick in private. He eyes Abel with skepticism. The long-eared gentleman will pay a half as cargo and won't complain about the company in the hold. Eleanor's mouth thins, but she counts out coins and pats Abel's neck. You'll keep your feet, my love, she murmurs. You always do, more than men. The deck stinks of tar and fish and rope and men. Riggers move like cats in the rigging. A boy no older than Rafe runs with a coil of line that looks too heavy for his ribs, then proves it is not. Martin stands near the rail and feels the planks hum under his boots, a low living sound like a hive. The pewter scallop at his throat is suddenly very small. Have you ever been to sea? Hugh asks, trying for cheer and mostly finding bravado. I have milked cows that change their minds faster, Martin says, and they both laugh because the joke is flimsy and needs their help to stand. They push off on a tide that heaves its shoulders under them. The town slides backward. The world widens and loses edges. Sails billow like lungs. The wind finds its level. Martin makes the mistake of looking straight down into the churn and feels his stomach perform a quiet, professional betrayal. He swallows, breathes slow through his nose, fixes his eyes on the low line where sky pretends to be solid. The channel wears its moods without apology. By midwater the wind has come up sharp from the west, and the sea answers with short, hard fists. The Mary Ann shoulders into them like an ox into bad weather, steady and stubborn, but the deck is a game with new rules. Buckets appear. Men who boasted ashore make hasty peace with humility. Hugh turns pale, then an interesting shade of green. Eleanor ties her hair back and sets her feet in a sailor's stance, which she must have learned from watching the world closely. A coil of rope slithers like a startled snake. Someone swears in French. Someone else swears in God's best plain English. The master roars a line of monosyllables that even the wind thinks it best not to argue with. Rain arrives in separate pieces, stinging and clean. The horizon folds in. The sky loses its margins. St. Christopher, keep us. A woman whispers near the mast, clutching a token shaped like a wheel. Brother Michel is not here to make tidy sense of the danger. So Martin does what countrymen do. He works. He takes a line when it is handed to him, pulls when the men pull, leans his weight where weight is wanted. The world narrows to tasks and the sharp, bright awareness of not falling. Hugh retches. apologizes to the entire sea, retches again. A sailor with a face like an overturned bucket claps him on the shoulder. "Good lad," he says. "Feed her, and she'll treat you kindly tomorrow." The kindness of the statement is in the tone, not the prophecy. Below, Abel tethered unhappily among barrels of herring and 2 crates of screaming poultry, is audible in outraged intervals. Eleanor goes down once to quiet him and returns smelling like the inside of an argument. "He's decided he hates boats," she reports, then adds, without irony, "Sensible animal." Martin loses track of time. It becomes a thing measured not by hours, but by the sequence of waves: climb, slap, fall, breath, curse, prayer. He finds himself talking under the noise, not to anyone in particular. "For Ellen's hands," he says once, and later, "for Maud's ribbon," and later still, for "the way a field smells just after cutting." The words are not bargains so much as reminders of why he accepted the risk of being so very small on so much moving water. The wind builds again. Then, with the logic of weather, remembers mercy. The worst passes as quickly as it came. The Mary Ann relaxes into a long, less argumentative role. Faces uncrumple. Buckets are stowed. Rain steps back across the deck in a softer tread. "Land," the boy with the too heavy coil calls. Voice cracking on the A. All heads turn. The smudge of France shows itself ahead, low and grey and dainty. For the moment, the most beautiful idea on earth. The master allows himself a tight-lipped smile and concedes that the sea may yet be endured. As they near Calais, the water flattens into something almost friendly. The harbour receives them with the clank and bark of a place that has learned to make use of what the sea grants and takes. Ropes fly, knots flower, the timbers groan with the relief of things that have survived again. The smell of tar yields to the smell of wet stone and frying fish, which is not precisely better, but is at least different. On the quay, a customs man with a prudent moustache eyes their badges and baggage. He prods Abel's flanks with the mild interest of one who has prodded everything. Eleanor answers in careful street French, proving that need teaches languages faster than books. Coins change hands at the right velocity to be considered honest. They are permitted to become, officially, foreigners. Hugh stands on shore as if expecting the ground to shift under him. When it does not, his relief is immediate and shapeless. "We did not die," he announces, then blushes, as if the declaration is too grand for such ordinary success. "No," Martin agrees, and looks back at the sea, which looks back with its single great unblinking eye. "But we learned how easily we might." He presses the pewter scallop flat against his chest, not for protection but as a weight that keeps a part of him from floating away. The sky over France is the same colour as the sky over England. Men shout in different words and mean the same urgencies. The road reforms itself on this new shore, shrugging off salt and rain, and beckons inland with its old, patient gesture. Eleanor checks Abel's legs, then her packs, then her face in the sheen of a puddle as if to make sure she still exists. "Come," she says. "Let's find a place to sleep where the floor does not move and where the bread thinks itself French." They shoulder their packs, adjust their habits to a new language. and set first feet on the next country as if it had been waiting specifically for them, 3 small figures in a world that, today at least, has decided not to swallow them whole. The wind smells of the same sea and a different promise. The vow is exactly as far away as it was this morning, and yet their hearts, for reasons not entirely theological, feel closer to it. France begins as a taste, butter and smoke, and a little sweetness that clings in the crust of bread. Calais recedes. The road turns inland through flat fields, whose ditches shine like mirrors. Words change their coats. Men at the quay had shouted par ici and vite, as if speed itself were a sacrament. Beyond the town, speech lowers its shoulders and widens its vowels. Eleanor walks at the front because her market French is better than Martin's none and Hugh's bravado. Abel follows with his philosophical plod, ears like weather vanes. They learn quickly the 3 phrases that keep poor pilgrims alive: pain, s'il vous plaît, oh, and mercy. The first 2 by grace. The last pays a debt no coin can touch. Martin tries each word as if it were a stone he is not yet sure will hold his weight. Mercy, he discovers, is a small bow you can carry in the mouth. The country is patched with rye and flax. Farther on, low orchards hunch under netted clouds of blossom. In one village, women beat linen with paddles at a stream, the thwack like measured thunder. Chickens move out of the road with the absent-minded dignity of things that have survived every war. The bells in these parts do not ring so much as think out loud. They share the day with other walkers, a cobbler whose bag clicks with awls, a mother with 2 children harnessed by a cord so they can roam without vanishing, a man who swears he is taking a goose to his cousin in Cambrai, though the bird looks older than both men put together. Everyone carries a small piece of a story. Everyone is ready to trade. At an inn-yard outside St. Omer, they fall in with scholars bound for Paris, 2 thin men with ink on their sleeves, haircut like practical saints. Their Latin is clean. Their French is fast. Their English non-existent. Their smiles universal. Brother Michel would have enjoyed them. Aristoteles, one says with reverence, patting his satchel as if the philosopher were folded inside for warmth. The other unfolds a scrap of parchment and, with charcoal, draws a crude map on the bench between pewter cups, a line for the road, a square for each cathedral town, a fat dot where a patron is rumoured to support students with bread and occasional patience. Roma? The first scholar asks, eyebrows up, and when Martin nods, the scholar lays both hands over his heart in the international sign for awe and impossibility. Longe, he says. Far. Longe, Martin repeats, smiling despite the weight of the word. He points to himself, then to the south, then to the sky, then taps the pewter scallop under his cloak. The scholar understands enough. He sketches a blessing with his charcoal and smears his fingers black. It is a puzzle, this business of speaking without a common tongue. Hugh takes to it as he takes to most things too quickly and with bright mistakes. He says fromage as if it were a battle cry and attempts to order milk by making a gesture so elaborate the innkeeper gives him beer to stop the performance. Eleanor watches, amused, then gently corrects. Listen to how they bite the ends of words. She tells him, "You can't swallow the last syllable here, or you change bread into broom." farther along, near the low hills where the earth begins to fold, they meet a soldier walking with a limp that has memorized his path. His bow is unstrung. His leather jerkin is rubbed to the grain on one side where a shield once rode. His left ear is a half ear. He salutes with 2 fingers, Anglo-French neutral. Crazy, he says when Hugh's eyes go to the limp, and coughs a laugh without joy. Long ago, he taps his own knee with his knuckle. Arrow went through a man and then through me. The man died. I married. He shrugs to show the justice in it. They share a crust and a story under a willow whose roots drink greedily from a rill. The archer William, speaks slow enough for their ears to follow. He says that wars crawl back and forth like children fighting over the same toy, that kings change and taxes do not, that sometimes the only difference between an enemy and a neighbor is which direction he is walking. He says, almost tenderly, that a hot loaf split among 3 men on a cold road can outweigh a purse of copper. Low pain, he says, breaking a piece from his own. Est plus fort que la peur. Bread is stronger than fear. Martin files the sentence beside John the Mason's truth about keystones. Small truths, he thinks, are what hold the vault. In a village near an old Roman road, its stones shouldering up through grass like broken teeth, a priest with a soft face and dirt under his nails opens the rectory door without asking for news of their souls. He speaks a parish priest's Latin that melts into French like snow into water. There is straw in the loft, he says, and soup on the fire of an honesty commensurate to its ingredients. He glances at the scallop badge. Leave your prayer there. He points to his own chest. It travels better curled up in your ribs than pinned to a hat. They eat soup that tastes of leeks and patience. When the priest bows his head over the pot, he thanks God for rain, for feet that remember forward, for strangers who will sit and be less strange. In the loft, swallows scissor the dusk, stitching their small dark letters into the air. Hugh falls asleep with straw in his hair and a smile as careless as a child's. Eleanor snores in a key Abel answers from the stable below. Martin lies awake, counting the day's mercies, that his boots have not failed, that the river ford demanded only nerve and not lives, that his stomach, having memorized the sea, has agreed to forget it. He thinks how often men imagine salvation as a single blaze of light. On the road, it is a series of candle stubs, one after another, each enough to see the next step. The next day brings rain turned to thread too thin to soak you, too steady to forget. They walk through hedges fretted with wild roses, past a field where shepherds play a flute that might be music or might be a way to count the flock. At a crossroad, a merchant's cart has sunk to its axle where the track goes soft. Martin and Hugh shoulder the wheel, while Eleanor cajoles Abel into lending his strength. A child in the cart nose running, eyes huge watches, as if men lifting mud is the world's oldest wonder. When the wheel lurches free, the merchant weeps briefly and gives them 3 onions, which Eleanor treats as gemstones. Soup à la victoire, she declares. In the next town, under an arcade where pigeons hold committee, they hear a fragment of news that opens the world wider. A Florentine banker has gone under and pulled 3 lesser men after him. A saint's bone in Troyes turned out to be a goat's. A prince in the south is building a road with stones so well set that carts sing when they pass. The scholars would have smiled at the thought of a singing road. Martin tries to imagine the sound and cannot, but he hopes one day to hear it. Toward evening, the land lifts gently and gives them, for the first time in days, a distance worth naming. Far off, a cathedral pricks the sky with an exclamation made of stone. The scholars at the inn had marked Reims with a careful dot, but whether this is that or some other holy finger, Martin cannot tell. He only knows that the sight steadies him the way a long, level breath steadies a man lifting weight. Hugh points, eyes bright again. Eleanor's mouth softens, the way it does when cloth lies just so on the loom. We go there, Hugh asks. We go as far as the road lets us, Martin says. And farther, if bread and kindness stretch. They walk until the light is the colour of warm pewter. A hare flickers across the path like an afterthought. Abel plods with the resigned virtue of saints and donkeys. When they finally stop, it is by a field where haystacks stand like monks. They eat onion and black bread and a piece of cheese that tastes like the inside of a bell. The wind dries their cloaks. Night rises out of the grass. Martin touches the scallop at his throat, not as a man touches a talisman, but as a traveller touches a mile marker. Mercy, he says to whom? He could not say, and lets the word go out into the French dark, where it finds its own road and walks beside them, invisible and faithful as breath. They meet the mountains first as a change in the air. The wind turns thin and clean, as if someone has sieved it through stone. Vineyards taper off into scrub. Oaks give way to larch and fir. The road narrows and begins to think in switchbacks. Somewhere behind them the country of bread and butter recedes. Ahead, the world sharpens to a blade. Reims lies behind like a memory pressed in wax. Dijon passes in a blur of mustard-coloured walls and a bell that rings too fast for their feet. They keep south and east, skirting valleys that smell of wet hay, following mule tracks that stitch villages to passes. People in these parts measure distance not by miles but by rivers crossed and ridges gained. When Martin asks a carter how far to the hospice, the man points up with his chin and says, 2 prayers and 1 stubbornness, which turns out to be accurate. Eleanor slows first. It begins with a cough she treats like a rude guest and ends with heat under her skin that will not listen to reason. She insists on walking until the walking unthreads her sentences. At a hamlet with roofs heaped like hayricks, a woman touches Eleanor's forehead and clucks. Fièvre, she says. Fever. Her husband brings a bowl of milk and thyme. Their child, serious as an accountant, produces a rag doll and presses it on Abel without explanation. The donkey accepts the office gravely. They stay a day they cannot afford. Eleanor sleeps under a heap of blankets that smell of wood smoke and sheep. Hugh fetches water and returns with stories. Martin does not leave her side except to stand outside and look up at peaks that draw their own cold around them like cloaks. He feels, for the first time on the road, the old fear with teeth in it, the fear of being the strongest person in a situation and finding that insufficient. By morning, the fever loosens its fingers. Eleanor opens her eyes like someone completing a bargain. I will walk, she says. slowly. Or else I will stay and start a new life in that corner. She tilts her chin at a spot by the hearth where the shadows have arranged themselves comfortably. The joke lands. Humour puts a coin back in her purse. They climb. The track becomes a stitched seam in a vast, frayed garment. Marmots whistle and vanish. Far below, river water throws itself into bowls of light and keeps reappearing, chastened and louder. Stones chatter under their boots. The packs feel heavier than arithmetic allows. Hugh learns the pilgrim's uphill prayer, not words but counting steps to a number that seems possible, then starting again. At noon they reach a ledge where the world opens in all directions and decides against them. The wind blows like a clever enemy, finding gaps in cloak and collar. Clouds drag their bellies along jagged teeth. Snow from last winter survives in dirty piles that refuse instruction. Martin thinks of fields, of furrows that made sense because they were parallel to other furrows. There is only one furrow here, up. The first snow arrives without flakes, just a fine dust, like flour shaken over a baker's table. It pecks at eyelashes, lies to the eye about depth. The path threads between rocks that remember avalanches. A little higher, a wayside cross leans out of a drift, as if the man who set it knew that some gestures must keep watch even when men sleep. Hugh slips where meltwater has glassed the rock. His cry is short and ungenerous, the sound a body makes when it knows it has been surprised. He lands with his leg twisted under him and a look on his face like the few weeks of childhood he had left have just been spent in one instant. Martin is at his side before the echo comes back. "Don't move," he says. Though the command is redundant, Hugh has no intention of moving. Eleanor kneels, breath thin, eyes skilled. She runs her hands below his knee and above his ankle. Her touch has the calm of someone who has broken and mended many practical things. Not snapped. She murmurs, "A bad sprain, perhaps a small break near the foot. We must bind it. Then we must be stubborn." She tears a strip from her own underskirt, folds a pad of wool, makes a brace from a dwarf pine twig the mountain generously provides. Abel lowers his head as if to inspect and sneezes condolence. They cannot go back. The ledges behind are worse than those ahead, and they cannot leave him. So the three of them revise the mountain's intentions. Martin takes most of Hugh's pack and some of Eleanor's. Eleanor takes Hugh under the arm on the good side. Martin takes him on the other. Hugh takes his own weight in his teeth. They progress as if acting out a parable of perseverance 3 feet long. Snow thickens. Distance turns false. Landmarks you swear are an hour away reach you in 10 minutes. An easy corner consumes 20. Once, the path loses itself in drifts and reveals itself again by the courtesy of a line of stones crowned with rime. Twice, they hear thunder where there are no clouds, the voice of shifting ice somewhere they hope is not directly above. Near dusk, when their breath has learned to bargain and failed, a shape grows out of the whiteness, a low, long house shouldering into the wind, its roof heavy with intent. A bell sounds, not sweetly, but with that practical authority certain noises acquire after centuries. Out of a door swings a man in a fur-lined hood, followed by 2 dog-shaped miracles with barrels at their necks. The dogs regard them like a kindly court and wag justice. Bienvenue, the man says. Then, seeing the leg and the colour of Eleanor's mouth, he switches to a language older than towns. Come in. Sit down. Give me your burdens. The words are hands. They are taken into the hospice, as if into a ship. The air smells of soup and wet wool, and something like sainthood but louder. The brothers move with a practiced quiet. Boots are unlaced. Wet wrappings taken. A bowl of warm wine pressed into each hand, as if cups knew where to go. One brother examines Hugh's leg with the same competent reverence he might give a gospel. No fracture that will change a life, but weeks of anger ahead. He binds and splints and improves Eleanor's brace with a length of willow and a strip of felt that has known other storms. Martin wants to talk about vows, about how near he came to being unequal to the promise he made under the ash tree, but the hospice has little interest in stories and much in soup. A bowl arrives, steam wreathed, tasting of garlic and salvation. Eleanor eats half and sleeps inside the remainder without apology. Later, when the wind presses its face to the shutters like a bored giant, a brother with a face as chapped as theology sits with Martin by the hearth. He speaks a French fattened by mountains. Martin answers with the lean words he owns. The brother tells him this pass has taken men and given back bones polished by snow, that summer is as treacherous as winter, that the dogs do not find everyone, but they keep trying. He mentions Saint Bernard only once, as if the saint were a practical elder who would prefer more firewood to more discussion of virtue. Dieu est dans les mains, the brother says finally, laying his own broad palms near the heat. God is in the hands. Martin looks at his scarred where hedges bit, stiff where old cold took a little, red now from thaw and labour, and thinks the statement is less doctrine than inventory. He remembers the ribbon Maud wanted, bright as the cloth around the wayside cross. He remembers Ellen's kiss on the threshold and the exact dryness of the morning then. Suddenly, the journey feels both impossible and already accomplished, as if the road were an organ inside him doing its quiet work. In the morning, the snow has stepped back a pace. The brothers lend them staffs of juniper and advice you can use. Keep to the left of the big rock shaped like a bishop's hat. Don't trust the crust afternoon. If the cross disappears, you have disappeared, too. They load Hugh on a sledge for the first steep stretch. One of the dogs, trotting importantly beside, as if to supervise. At the last door, the brother claps Martin's shoulder. Courage, he says, and then, with a small smile, and patience. The second is the elder sister of the first. They move on into a world rearranged by light. Peaks glare like truths. The sky is a thin, impossible blue. Breath makes a small country in front of each face and then abolishes it. Hugh manages with a staff and a hop, furious and brave. Eleanor walks as if each step were an argument she intends to win. Abel does what donkeys do best, he keeps going. By noon the pass yields, not like a door opening, but like a hand unclenching. The slope gentles. The wind carries a new wet smell, as if someone down valley is washing fruit. Far off, notched into the mountain's apron, a line of roofs glints with human intent. The world is still huge, but for the first time in days it seems to be listening. Martin stops and turns to look back. The hospice sits squat against the white. A coal of kindness in a grate of stone. He lifts his hand in a gesture not quite a wave and not quite a blessing. Mercy, he says again into a language that has learned to carry that word faithfully. Then he faces south and the road, with its old, patient shrug, agrees to begin again. Italy begins as a smell wet leaves and smoke sweetened by something resinous. Chestnut shells crushed underfoot. The first olive fires of the year. The wind loses its knife and becomes a hand. They come down out of the white world into green. And the green has a softness Martin's eyes have almost forgotten. The track widens to a mule road beside a stream that talks all day without repeating itself. Language shifts again. Mercy becomes grazi. Bread is pain. Water is aqua. And people move their hands when they speak as if words alone were too thin to carry meaning. Villages hang on hillsides like swallow nests. Vines run in patient lines. Laundry flaps from balconies. White flags of ordinary victory. In a market near Aosta, a woman sells roasted chestnuts and laughs when Hugh burns his fingers. Eleanor samples a fig and closes her eyes in a silence that is not prayer but deserves the same respect. Abel, introduced to the sweet pulp, concludes that God has been holding out on donkeys. Hugh's leg mends in the stubborn way of young bone. He goes from hobble to 2 sticks to 1, to a staff he carries more from pride than pain. He gains a new caution, which he disguises poorly with jokes. Eleanor's cough returns in the evenings and leaves her in the mornings, as if the night lays claim and day negotiates a truce. They pause a week in a town whose bridge is older than any priest in it. A mason there shows Hugh how to dress stone so it listens to weight. John the mason's lesson about keystones hums in the background like a remembered psalm. Hugh glows with the work, the honest exhaustion, the sharp talk, the cleverness of turning rock into thought. I could stay, he admits one night, rubbing grit from his palms, ashamed and thrilled by the possibility. You could, Eleanor says, with no judgment in it. The road doesn't empty a man if it leaves him a craft. Martin says nothing for a time, because the word stay has a way of echoing in the mind like a bell. In the end, the road chooses for them. The foreman who sees talent the way a hawk sees motion offers Hugh coin for the summer if he'll keep learning. He gestures toward Martin's scallop and toward the south. Roma, he says, shrugging. A man who has seen many vows and knows they come in different shapes. Hugh looks between friend and foreman, between the road he's walked and the wall he can shape. He swallows. I'll see you again, he tells Martin. The promise as reckless as all such promises, and no less dear for that. They part at a bend where the road splits one way toward a quarry's bright scab, one toward a valley that smells of river and manuscripts. They stand awkwardly, 3 people who have shared bread and weather and will now share distance. Eleanor hugs Hugh hard. Martin clasps his forearm the way men do when they have not learned to say the other thing. Then they turn away, as travellers must, and do not look back, because looking is a wound that takes too long to heal. The days after are quieter, not just because there is one less voice. The rhythm changes. Eleanor walks with a contained intensity. as if trying to keep pace with something that has gone ahead. Martin measures his steps to match hers and pretends not to hear when her breath lifts and roughens. They sleep in barns, in chapels, under vines. He learns to be grateful for the ordinary splendors of Italy, the way towns rehearse themselves in the evening light as if preparing for a painting, the way a hill will carry a church like a lantern, the way even a poor man's soup tastes, as if someone had sung over it. South of Lucca, Eleanor's cough fails to keep its covenant with morning. She wakes grey around the mouth and sets her jaw at the look on Martin's face. "Not now," she says, and it is bravado. Then, more gently, "Not yet." They reach a roadside hospice run by women whose hands are better than any theology. Eleanor sleeps, drifts, wakes for sips of broth, smiles without moving much. Abel stands under the eaves and flicks his ears as if arguing with flies about what is fair. Martin sits and counts her breaths and thinks about fields he has cut and how sometimes the stalk leans away a little before it falls. On the third evening she asks him to open her pack. From the bottom she draws a tiny parcel of cloth, and from it a narrow length of ribbon, faded but still defiantly red. "For Maud," she says. "You promised." She threads the ribbon through his fingers and closes them around it, her palm small and hot. Tell her a woman named Eleanor found it where the road met a rose bush, and she thought it belonged to a child who would know how to wear joy. She watches him until he nods, and then lets her eyes go where they have been wanting to go all day. In the morning the sisters wash her and wrap her and speak aloud the names of the saints as if introducing a guest to a crowded room where everyone is both important and kind. They bury her in the hospice garden among rosemary and lavender and the small white stones that keep company better than men sometimes do. Martin stands with his hands empty except for the ribbon, which feels heavier than iron. Abel butts his shoulder once. A donkey's improbable condolence. He gives the sisters what coin he can and mends their fence and splits their wood for 2 days because grief likes work that does not answer back. On the third day he takes Abel's rein and the road south, alone for the first time since the ash tree. Rome announces itself from a distance, not by towers but by ruins. Aqueducts stride across fields like the bones of ideas too big to bury. The city's dust has a different taste. Old stone ground, fine by centuries of footsteps and stubbornness. Pilgrims thicken the road again, Frenchmen with blistered piety, Germans with hymn snatches like thunder, Spaniards who wear fatigue like a medal. Martin walks among them with his scallop tucked under his cloak and his grief folded where he can touch it but not flaunt it. Then the city is simply there, walls, gates, a river that moves like history, bridges, as crowded, with life as London's, but older, less surprised by itself. He asks, and is pointed toward the Vatican Hill, to the old basilica where Peter is said to lie. Merchants offer lead badges and curls of parchment and forgiveness at prices that seem to have consulted a ledger rather than a gospel. Beggars sit where stone cools a little and extend hands like empty bowls. Martin gives what he can. He has learned that can is a word that stretches and shrinks depending on how you hold it. Old Saint. Peter's receives him like a cavern full of sunlight. The nave is a long hush, corrugated by columns. The floor is a map of other men's intentions. Light falls in shafts fat with dust, as if angels had been threshing somewhere. People kneel in a scatter, small as seeds. Martin kneels too. The stone presses his kneecaps with its honest hardness. He sets the ribbon on his palm, and his palm on the floor, as if to let the building feel the weight he carries. He does not make eloquence. He is tired of making meanings. He says names: Ellen, Rafe, Maud, Eleanor, Hugh. He says his sister's name, finally out loud, and the sound is not a wound this time, but a thread that binds something torn. He thanks the stubbornness that brought him here. He thanks the people whose hands taught him that God may be in stone, but is certainly in bread and wool and braces made of willow. He asks nothing, or thinks he asks nothing, and understands, to his small surprise, that asking nothing is a kind of asking to be made large enough to carry what you already have. At the confessio, the sun sneaks a bright thumb across bronze. A priest in a cope the colour of figs gives a blessing so practised it almost escapes him, then catches his own prayer at the end and looks into Martin's face as if surprised to find a person there. Pax. He says peace, and for once the word feels like a thing, not a slogan. When Martin rises, the basilica's silence does not feel empty. It feels occupied by centuries, by footfalls, by the barter of hope that has taken place here since stones were persuaded to stand together this way. He buys a small lead token stamped with keys, not because he believes in its power to guard his travel, but because he believes in the human need to hold something when the world is too large. Outside, a woman sells cups of water and calls them wine by way of wit. Children chase a dog that refuses wisdom. A mason patches a corner where last winter's rain proved something about mortar. The Tiber lifts and flirts with sunlight. Martin tucks the red ribbon deep in his tunic, presses the pewter scallop flat, and breathes. Rome, centre of a map he cannot read, has given him what it gives most generous, the feeling that your small road mattered enough to arrive. Tomorrow he will turn it around and begin the long business of carrying it home. The road home does not announce itself. It begins as a decision so small it could pass for breathing, the turn of a heel at the church door, the choice to face the same horizon from which you once arrived. Martin leaves Rome with the token of keys in his pouch, the pewter scallop warm from his skin, and the red ribbon folded like a flame against his heart. He goes north by streets that already know how to say goodbye past vendors resetting their stalls for morning, past doorways that remember the night's talk, past a mason who nods without stopping his trowel, as if to say, stones keep standing because men keep walking. Outside the walls the Campagna lies wide and deliberate, a book left open to weather. Olive trees throw lacework shade, sheep scissor the hills in quiet argument. Pilgrims flow both ways now, some sunburned and victorious, some newly blistered and full of questions. Martin walks among them with a calm he does not name. The city has not made him grand. It has made him precise. He will put one foot down and then the other until the miles amount to meaning again. He does not take exactly the same roads. That is a superstition he did not know he owned until he refused it. In Viterbo, he learns a new word for mercy from a widow who lets him sleep in her courtyard for the price of a story. In Pisa, he crosses a river where the water keeps insisting on the sky. In a hill town no map bothers to name, he hears a child practice the flute so patiently that the mistakes sound like part of the song. He keeps company for 3 days with a pair of Spaniards who swear Rome smells of oranges at Epiphany. They part at a shrine with laughter and the exchange of crumbs, which is to say, friendship. Abel, Eleanor's steadfast companion, goes as far as Lucca. There, Martin does what he must and what he would rather not. He sells the donkey to a baker whose yard smells like dawn. He sets his hand on the animal's brow and thanks him for his stubborn holiness. The baker, puzzled by the reverence, still offers an extra loaf. Martin walks out of the town feeling lighter and bereft at once, which is how most departures feel if you look at them honestly. By the time he reaches the foot of the Alps, winter has retreated into old drifts and new gossip. At the hospice, the brothers remember him with that particular warmth of men who see many faces and manage not to harden. Vous voilà. The chapped-faced brother says there you are, and the dogs perform an inspection with their noble, comic gravity. Over soup they speak little and mean much. Courage, the brother tells him at dawn, and patience. As before, and then, with a look at the scallop and the keys. Gratitude, which needs no translation. The pass is easier to descend than to climb, but not by much. Stones still speak in the same abrupt tongue. Edges still do their quiet work. Weather still reserves its right to change its mind. A day below the snow line, Martin catches himself humming a simple 3-note line. Brother Michel would approve and realizes the sound has been following him since Rome like a small, polite animal. At Aosta, he buys a second ribbon, blue as river shadow, because generosity multiplies when you let it. France receives him as it sent him, with bread that proves fear wrong, with vows that widen and soften the road. He looks for Hugh where the foreman kept his eye on talent and finds instead the echo of hammer on stone, which is to say, the boy's choice made solid. The wall rises a course higher. Martin adds a single stone with his own hands and leaves a laugh in the mortar, something for Hugh to find when the light is right. At Calais, the sea is in one of its reasonable moods. The crossing takes the shape of weathered routine, ropes, gulls, a deck that breathes like a large animal you've chosen to trust again. No one speaks of Eleanor, and yet the air is full of her, her practical voice telling him where to stand, her hand steadying Abel, her eyes measuring a horizon for its honesty. He presses the red ribbon flat against his ribs and lets the channel do its work. England smells like damp wool and apple peelings and a kind of mud that knows your name. The first hedgerow is a kind of homecoming hymn. In Canterbury, he steps into the nave and thanks the stone for keeping watch. In Hamgate, he buys 3 pins and does not bargain. On the ridge above Elmsworth, he stops long enough to see the pattern of thatch and smoke and lane and feel the strange double beat of joy and sorrow that belongs to every return. Ellen is mending by the door when he comes down the lane. She looks up once, and all the waiting, all the winter, all the work they have done separately collapses into a single, chaste amazement. There is no speech great enough to hold such a minute. So they do what married people have always done. They check each other for whether and where. She touches the new lines at his eyes and the old scar on his wrist, as if to reassure herself that additions do not cancel history. He notes the silver that has made a home in her hair like frost that refuses to lift. Then the children collide with him, Rafe taller, Maud fearless, and the house fills with the bright chaos of questions without commas. After the stew and the telling again because stories do not settle until they are repeated, he gives the gifts. To Rafe, the lead token stamped with keys, heavy as a counsel. To Ellen, a small olive wood spoon, smooth as the inside of a promise. To Maud, the ribbon, red first, then blue. He ties them into her hair with the ceremony of a knight receiving a blade. She stands very still, eyes wide, because she understands instinctively that some colours carry other people's miles. When the house sleeps at last, he slips outside to the ash tree on the north field. The bark under his palm is the same deliberate map it was the winter he made his vow. He lays his forehead where it once rested and says as plain as water, "I went." Then, because gratitude likes witnesses, he tells the tree what he saw, just one thing from each place. As if naming too much might frighten memory, the boy with the wax at Canterbury, the bridge in Italy, older than anyone's sorrow, the dogs whose barrels were full of reason. He says Eleanor's name and watches it rise like breath in cold air and vanish without being lost. In the days that follow, he finds his way back into the parish of ordinary tasks. The plough handles fit his palms with the old intimacy. The earth opens and accepts seed as if no one had ever doubted it. Yet nothing is exactly as it was. The lane to the well is longer and shorter in the same morning. The bells sound like cousins of bells he has heard far away. Bread is bread and also France. Smoke is smoke and also Rome. When neighbours ask what he found, he tells them the truth, roads and hands. When they press, he adds, kindness. And if they laugh at the smallness of the inventory, he does not mind. Small things hold arches. Sometimes at dusk, the children ask for the story, and he gives them pieces, never all at once. This bridge, that market, the wind that learned Latin in the mountains. He does not make the tales grander than the miles can bear, and he lets silence do a little of the work, because silence is how roads rest between travellers. On feast days he walks to the church and stands a little in the shade and very much in the light. On market days he moves through the noise and tries not to be clever in his judgments, remembering that cities are clever enough without help. Late in harvest, when stubble makes the hills look shaved and serious, he takes Maud to the ash. He ties one of her ribbons to a low branch where the weather can speak to it. It lifts and falls, an obedient flame. There, he says, that is how a vow looks when it chooses to stay. She nods with the absolute gravity of children and then runs to chase a hen that refuses to be symbolic. Winter arrives as it always does, declaring itself with haw and breath cloud. He mends tools, tells stories, learns to make soup that tastes like patience. On some evenings he stands in the doorway and lets the world sit entire on his tongue, smoke, cold, wool, sheep, iron, time. He thinks of Rome, which is still there, and of roads that spider web out from it like veins, and of how many feet rise and fall in any given night on promises made under trees and in kitchens and in the dark. He thinks, not sadly, that travel is not a matter of miles but of attention. He does not grow eloquent about any of this. He grows useful, which is a kind of eloquence, the poor respect. And when he lies awake in the black geometry of rafters he has always known, he tastes again the first morning's fear and finds it altered, less sharp, more companionable. The road he walked is now a shape inside him, a tool he can reach for when the day is tight. It has not ended. Roads never do. They fold into paths you carry under your ribs, so that even when you do not move, something in you is still keeping patient company with distance. On the first day of ploughing, he pauses at the field's far edge and looks west where the lane kinks out of sight. Thank you, he says to no one particular and to everything at once. Then he sets the plough and takes a step and then another, teaching the earth straight lines again, even as the road inside him keeps its beautiful curve. You've just walked through another forgotten corner of the past, not the world of kings or saints, but the quieter country where most of humanity has always lived. The small rooms, the muddy fields, the faith that bends but doesn't break. These are the places where history truly breathes. Here at Poor Historian, we don't chase the noise of glory. We listen for the whispers, the sound of a wooden spoon scraping the last meal from a pot. The hush before a bell tolls the breath of someone still alive after everyone richer has gone. The poor never wrote their stories, so we try to lend them a voice slow and steady, the way truth prefers to travel. If you've stayed this long, perhaps something in those voices found you. Maybe you recognized a little of yourself in their endurance, the quiet act of getting up again, of doing the work that no one will ever sing about. That's what this channel exists for, to remind us that survival is not small, that dignity can live in the dirt, and that memory is the gentlest kind of rebellion. Take a moment before you go. Let the sound of their world fade but not vanish. Picture the candlelight softening the corners of a cottage, or the hush that follows when the last tool is put away. Those lives are long gone, but their echoes are patient. They wait for anyone willing to listen without hurry. If you want to keep walking these narrow paths of the past, the ones that smell of smoke, sweat, and stories, you can help them stay lit. Subscribe to Poor Historian and let history find you when the world gets too loud. Leave a comment if a scene or a sentence stayed with you. That's how we keep these voices alive. And if this journey brought you a little calm, a little wonder, or just a better kind of silence, share it. Someone else might need that stillness too. There are more lives waiting here. Peasants, healers, builders, soldiers, mothers, ordinary souls who made the Middle Ages anything but dull. Their stories don't demand attention, they earn it. Each one is another piece of the great mosaic of how we got here, not through brilliance or conquest, but through persistence. So as you close your eyes or drift into sleep, remember this history isn't only what was written, it's what was endured. And somewhere, in the dust between centuries, the poor are still telling their stories, softly, stubbornly, gratefully, to anyone willing to listen. Thanks for listening, for remembering, and for keeping company with the forgotten. We'll meet again in the next quiet story.